Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. We're now on part 2 of our shiurim today on Chaf Av in the writings of the Rebbe's father, Rabbi Levi Yitzchok Schneerson, who of course was the Rebbe's father and a noted scholar both in the revealed teachings of Torah, Nigla of Torah, as well as Pnimis HaTorah, the teachings of Chassidus, and more specifically the teachings of Kabbalah. So this morning we looked at a biur of Rebbe Levi on the Zohar. We know that the Rebbe's father wrote on the notes of a Zohar which Rebbe Tzimchana brought to his makom of exile, to his place of exile, and he wrote in the margins in ink which Rebbe Tzimchana prepared, he wrote notes and Chiddushim in the Zohar. So we looked at something this morning from the Chiddushim of Rebbe Levi on the Zohar Parshas Eikev. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at a section of Torah's Levi Yitzchok, the teachings of the Rebbe's father, in analyzing a Mishnah. Because the same way that the Rebbe's father will deconstruct a Zohar and analyze the words of the Zohar, the Rebbe's father also in many of his writings will take parts of the Gemara or the teachings of the Mishnah, Maimarei Chazal and the like, and will explain on a deeper level what is going on over here and what they represent. Now, of course, we know that Torah, all of Torah, is one Torah, and Torah exists on multiple levels. There is the Kabbalistic levels, there's the revealed levels. So whilst the Mishnah on the revealed level will be discussing a halachic concept, we'll be discussing it, in our case, the Mishnah in Kiddushin, Daf Samach Vav, is talking about laws with regards to permissible and forbidden marriages. Rebbe Levi explains how the Mishnah, in fact, is reflecting deeper and deeper levels the way things exist in the teachings of Kabbalah in the supernal worlds as well. So before I share the text of Rebbe Levi himself, I'm going to bring up the text of the Mishnah, which everyone is welcome to follow along inside. And it says as follows. So this is the Mishnah from Samach Daf Samach Vav Amud Beis, page 66b in the Mishnah in Mesechta Kiddushin. And the Mishnah has 4 parts. So the first part says as follows. Anytime that there is a marriage where there is going to be valid Kiddushin, the Kiddushin is effective, is chal, and it does not involve any Avera, i.e., people are allowed to marry one another. It's permitted for these people to marry one another. So in such a case, where there is a marriage, where there is Kiddushin, and there is no Avera involved, Havlad hoylech achar zachar. Any child born to that marriage, the child will follow the father. So what is the example of this? The Eza, what is the case of a marriage where there is Kiddushin and there's no Avera? That is any Jew who is permitted to marry any other Jew. Zu kohenes levia b'Yisraelis shenisu lekohen ulelevi u'liyisrael. It is a full-fledged Jewess, either a daughter of a Kohen, the daughter of a Levi, or a Yisrael, who marries a fully-fledged Jew, either a Kohen, a Levi, and Yisrael. So there is Kiddushin, it's a valid marriage. There's no Avera, they're allowed to marry one another. The halacha is the child follows the father. So if the mother is a Levia and the father is a Kohen, the child will be a Kohen. If the mother is a Kohenes and the father is a Yisrael, the child will follow the father. So that is the rule in such union. So that is part 1. Then we come to part 2. V'chol makom sheyesh kiddushin veyesh avera. Any time where there is kiddushin, that there is a valid kiddushin, there is a valid marriage. However, despite being valid, this marriage involves an avera. It is something which is forbidden. Generally speaking, it's forbidden as a prohibition, a negative law of the Torah. Havlad hoylech achar hapagum. The status of a child born to that union, where there is kiddushin, it's a valid marriage, but it involves an avera, the child born will follow the deficiency or the blemish, the flaw of whichever parent is flawed. So what is an example? The Ezoi, what is a case? Zu amana l'kohen gadol, gerusha v'chaluta l'kohen hedjoit, mamzeres unasina liYisrael, bas Yisrael l'mamzer ulanasin. So we have over here a number of scenarios. Number 1, a kohen gadol is not allowed to marry an almana, a widow. If a kohen gadol marries a widow, the marriage is binding, the marriage is effective, and they would require a get. However, there is an avera. They've transgressed the law of the Torah. So the child will take on the pagum, the flaw of this relationship, which is that the child will become a chalal and therefore disqualified as a kohen. Similarly, a kohen hedjot, a regular kohen, is not allowed to marry either a garusha or a chalutza, a divorced woman or a woman who underwent chalitza. And again, a child born from this, because there is valid kiddushin, a valid marriage, but it involves an aveira, the child will follow the pagum, will follow the flawed parent, and the child will take on the status of a chalal or a chalala, who is forbidden to marry into the koyanim and disqualified from service. The next category is a mamzer or a mamzeres, a female mamzer who's born to a forbidden incestuous relationship, or a nesina. Just quickly, what were the nesinim? We know that when Yeshua entered into Eretz Yisrael, he conquered Eretz Yisrael. Any nation he would fight against, he would offer them the chance to make a peace treaty if they would surrender, submit themselves to be subservient to the Jewish people and to take upon themselves Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. Now there was a nation of Gibeon, the Gibeonim. They actually lived in Eretz Yisrael, and the Torah says in Eretz Yisrael you've got to wipe them all out. And the Gibeonim didn't want to go through that, so they came and they basically made as if they were coming from a distant land to make a peace treaty with the Jewish people. Yeshua swore to them and made a peace treaty, and after he found out this ruse that they had made, he said that they will have a status that they will be the water drawers and the wood choppers for the Jewish people, and they are called Nesinim. And Nasin has a Jewish status. However, they are not able to marry in. It's considered a blemish in Yichus. So if either a mamzeres or a nesina, daughter born to these Givonim or descendant of these Givonim, married a Yisrael, a fully fledged Jewish male, then again, it's a Kiddushin, it's a valid marriage, but there is Yesh Aveira, there is a sin that is involved here, and Havlad Hoylech Achar HaPagum, and therefore the child will take on the blemish and will be considered a mamzer. If a mamzeres marries a Jewish man, the child will be a mamzer. If a nesina marries a Jewish man, the child will be a nasin. And then we have the last case, Bas Yisrael, the mamzer, or a nasin. If a Bas Yisrael, a fully fledged Jewish girl, marries either a mamzer, a Jewish male who is a mamzer, or a nasin, again, there is a valid kiddushin, a valid marriage, but it entails an aveira, they violated a law of the Torah, and the halacha is the vlad hoylech achar hapagum, and therefore the child will be either a mamzer or a nasin, depending on the case. So that's the second distinction. Then we come to the third category. And the third category reads as follows. Anyone, if you have a woman who she has kiddushin if she marries someone else, but for this person that she engaged in relations with or married, there is no valid kiddushin, Havlad mamzer, the child will be mamzer, a mamzer. And what is that? That is one who has relations with any of the forbidden relationships, the arayos in the Torah. So, for example, a brother and a sister are not allowed to marry one another, but she is allowed to marry any other Jew. She yesh Allah al acherim kiddushin. She has kiddushin if she marries somebody else, not her brother, not her relative. But to the one she had relations with, there is no kiddushin. If they were to have relations and produce a child, that child would be a mamzer. And then we come to the final category, and that is any woman, or vice versa, a man, who not only is there no valid kiddushin with this individual that she had a child with, or to any other Jewish person, Havlad Kamoisa, the child will follow the mother. The Eze, what is this? Vlad Shifcha V'Nachris, a child that is born, if a Jewish man has relations either with a Canaanite slave or a non-Jew, then there is no kiddushin whatsoever. She has no kiddushin with him or with any Jew, and therefore the resulting child follows the mother and will have the status of the mother, which in this case will be either a non-Jew, a child born to a non-Jewish mother is not Jewish, or will be a slave. So that is the Mishnah. 4 sections in the Mishnah. And we'll recap in a moment. And just to bring down, because this is relevant to our discussion in the writings of Rebbe Levi, so the Gemara on this says, Rabbi Tarfon Omer. Rabbi Tarfon says Yechoilin mamzerin letaher. The case of the mamzerim, a mamzer can become tahor. Mamzer can become tahor. Kate said, how is that? Mamzer shenasa shivcha. If a mamzer were to marry a shivcha, were to marry a mamzer, a Jewish person who is a mamzer because he's born from an incestual forbidden relationship, he goes and he marries a Canaanite non-Jewish maid servant, and they have a child. So we mentioned that that is the third category, Havlad Eved. The child will take on the status of the Eved, which is the Pegima. But Shichroi, once that child who is now an Eved becomes freed, emancipated, then Nimtza ben Chorin, he is now a fully fledged free Jew. So there's this Eitzah, and this is in fact the halacha, that is a way that a mamzer, whilst he himself cannot become kosher and eligible to marry into the Jewish fold, but he has a way of making sure that his children could become kosher once more. But Rebbe Eliezer argues, Rebbe Eliezer Omer, Hareze Eved Mamzer, no, in such a case, he's a double whammy. He gets the pegima from both sides, that he is a mamzer like his father, he is an Eved like his mother, and he retains both statuses. So Rebbe Eliezer argues with this. So quickly, just to summarize, because it's important for our understanding Rebbe Levik's writing to get this straight, 4 parts in the Mishnah. Number 1, if there is valid Kiddushin, and there is no Avera in that Kiddushin, like a Jew marrying a Jew, then the child follows the father. If the father is a Kohen, the child is a Kohen. If the father is a Levi, the child is a Levi, etc., etc. If there is Kiddushin, but there is an Avera, that is, for example, a Kohen marrying a divorcee and the like, then the child is Jewish, but will take on the Pegima of the parent who has that flaw, has that defect. So if it's in that case, the child would be a chalal. If it was a mamzeres marrying a Jewish man, the child would be a mamzer, etc. Point number 3, if there is no Kiddushin for this man that she has a child with, but if she married another Jewish person, there would be valid Kiddushin, then that would be a mamzer. That is the forbidden relationships in Torah of incest, a mother to a child, a brother to a sister, etc. And then finally, if there would be no Kiddushin, either with this man or with any other man, then the child follows the mother, and that would be, for example, a non-Jewish woman with a Jewish man. The child would be not Jewish like the mother. So that is the Mishnah. I want you to please keep that in mind. We're now going to go to the writings of Rebbe Levi himself on this Mishnah, and we will have a look at how Rebbe Levi decodes this Mishnah and explains the 4 sections of the Mishnah itself. So this is from Rabbi Levi Yitzchok on our Mishnah. Again, he quotes the Mishnah, and we're going to skip that because we've just learned that together. We're going to jump straight into the writings of Rebbe Levi. And I have a chart afterwards which will help us to see this a little bit more visually. So Rebbe Levi says as follows: Yesh kan daled chalukos. The Mishnah has 4 distinct divisions. V'hagimel chalukas rishonos, in the first of the 3 scenarios, yesh metzius kiddushin. There either is or there is the possibility of kiddushin. Whereas in the 4th category, there is no kiddushin at all. So let's see. Hachaluka alaf, the first distinction, hu kiddushin toivim legamri. This is an absolutely perfect Jewish marriage. A Jewish man and a Jewish woman who are eligible to marry one another. There's no Avera involved whatsoever. Hachaluka base, in the 2nd category, who gamken kiddushin toivim, it's a valid kiddushin, but it involves an avera, like a kohen and a divorcee. So there is kiddushin, but an avera. In the 3rd distinction, alav ein kiddushin klal, whilst with this particular man and woman there is no kiddushin, the yesh avera gedola ma'oid shaba ala erva, for example, a brother and a sister, and in fact it involves a great avera because it's one of the forbidden arayos in the Torah. But yesh kiddushin toivim, were she to marry any other man, it would be a valid, good kiddushin. So in all of these 3 categories, there is some level of kiddushin. But in the 4th category, ein metzius kiddushin klal. For example, a non-Jewish woman with a Jewish man, there is no kiddushin no matter who she were to marry. There's no kiddushin either with this man or with other men. Ba'avlad kamoisa, and then the child takes on her status, which would be, in this case, a non-Jew. So it would seem from this that the fourth category is the worst because there's no Kiddushin at all. Ach, says Rebbe Levi, in this fourth category, yesh maila. There is a quality, there is a redemptive quality, she'avlad yachol histaken, that the child that is born could become corrected, velisa afilu kohenes, and then could marry any Jewish woman, including the daughter of a kohen. And when is that? Buhu kushin nisgayer, if he converts. So a Jewish man has relations with a non-Jewish woman. There's no Kiddushin at all. The child follows her and therefore is not Jewish. But if that child converts, they are a fully fledged Jew. They could even marry the daughter of a kohen. Similarly, the evet sheshichroi ba'alav kasher. If the mother was a female Canaanite maidservant and a Jewish man had relations with her, the offspring would be a slave like the mother. But if the owner frees that slave, then the child will be kosher, will become a fully fledged Jew and can marry any Jewish woman he wants. Mutarim afilu kohenes, could even marry the daughter of a kohen. Ma'ayin bedaf ayin beis amud beis bedaf ayin gimel amud aleph. Look further in the Gemara. Now, Masha Enkein, in the brackets, Rebbe Levi says that is in contrast b'chaluka habeis b'mamzeres unesina liyisrael. If we go back to our second case, the second case is where there is valid Kiddushin, but there is an Aveira. So, for example, a Mamzeres or a Nesina married a Jewish man, or a Jewish woman married either a Mamzer or a Nasin, Shavlad Mamzer, then in this case the child is considered as a Mamzer. And certainly in the third category, where there is a forbidden incestual relationship where the child is clearly a mamzer, ein tikkun lezeh. There is no way to fix that up. Now, the im ki yesh tikkun Rebbe Tarfon. So we learned the Mishna Daf Samach Tes Amud Aleph. Even though we learned that according to Rebbe Tarfon, there is a way for a mamzer to become restored. That is, she yechol mamzein litayr, by, for example, the mamzer marrying off their child to a Canaanite slave, and then that child that is born to that relationship, by freeing them, they become a fully fledged Jew once more and able to marry anyone. But that is not a tikkun for the mamzer himself. That is only a tikkun for his future offspring. But if we go to the fourth section, where if you have a child who is born to a relationship of a non-Jewish woman to a Jewish man, the child themselves could be fixed up by converting, or in the case of a slave, by being emancipated. And furthermore, and as we saw, Rabbi Eliezer disputes Rabbi Tarfon, the Svir Leishu Eved Mamzer, and says that no, this child will have the status of both the maidservant, being an Eved, as well as being a mamzer. Even though the halacha is like Rabbi Tarfon. So again, the first three dinim in the Mishnah, there are Kiddushin. The fourth, there is no Kiddushin at all. But there is a difference that whereas in the second and the third scenario, there is no way for that child to get rid of their blemish. In the fourth scenario, if the child were to convert, they can get rid of their blemish. So says Rebbe Levi, based on this, Yesh lefarish, we could explain Shadalad Chalukas Halalu, that these four divisions in the Mishnah, Heim Bedalad Olamis Atzilus Bria Yetzira Asiya, Abiyash for short, that these four sections in the Mishnah parallel the four worlds discussed in Kabbalah and Hasidus as part of the evolvement of our world from the Ein Sof, from the divine light, and they are Atzilus Bria Yetzira and Asiya. And we're going to see now, and Rebbe Levi is going to explain at great length, how each section in the Mishnah, in order, in sequence, parallels one of these four worlds. Hachaluka Aleph, the first division, Hu Be'atzilus, corresponds to the world of Atzilus, which is the highest, most lofty of worlds, the world which is completely godly and good. Shesham Yesh Kiddushin, there, in the first case, the Mishnah, like a Kohen marrying a Yisraelis, or a lady marrying a kohenes, etc., there is kiddushin. Ki or abba hanikra kodesh mekanen ba'atzilus. Just an important point to put into context over here. The spheres can be divided into 4 primary levels. Even though we talk about 10 spheres, there's the sphere of chachma, there's the sphere of bina, there's the 6 emotional spheres of chesed, gvura, tiferes, netzach, hod, and yesod, and then we have the sphere of malchus. So the spheres are grouped into 4 groupings. The Zohar tells us that in each of these 4 worlds, there is a primary revelation of one of these spheres. So in the most lofty world, the world of Atzilus, that is where the sphere of Chachma resides. And Chachma is called Abba, the Father, and it is also referred to as the level of Kodesh, because it is removed, it's beyond. V'sham ein avera klal. So in the world of Atzilus, there is Kodesh, there is Kiddushin, because there is the revelation of Chachma, and there is no Avera. Avera represents negativity. It says about the world of Atzilus, playing on the pasuk in Tehillim, lo yegurcha ra. Sorry, that there is no evil residing in the world of Atzilus. It's a world which is completely godly and good. Shehu kulei toiv. So what is the rule in such a case where you have valid kiddushin and there is no avera? Havlad hoylach achar hazachar shuhu ha'av. The child of that relationship follows the male, and the male is the av, the father. Now we've explained that the father represents the sphere of Chachma, but what is the child? So in Atzilus we also have the midos. We know Chassidus explains to us that Chachma and Bina is the mother and father which produce our emotional responses. So the child is the emotions. Ki b'Atzilus mekanen Chachma hanikras av, hanikra av, v'hu dechura zachar. So Chachma is the masculine parent, that is the av. The gam zachar hu milashon zikaron. And furthermore, not only is it masculine, but the word zachar, meaning a male, is also related to the idea of zikaron, to remember. The zikaron hu b'mayach hachachma. So we know that our mind is capable of different functions. The analytical mind, our ability to ponder, to question, to develop ideas, that is bina. Chachma is the source of our ideas, but it is also the source of our zikaron, our memory. So the word zachar, being related to the word to remember, is also connected to the attribute of chachma, which pervades the world of Atzilus. Kamoi, and where do we see this? Parshas Kadesh, Shalaneger Chachma, Ksiv Sham Ola Zikaron Chulu. In the Tefillin, there are 4 parshas. In the Tefillin, there are 4 parshas which mention the mitzvah of Tefillin. In the Tefillin Shorosh, there are 4 boxes on the head. Each box contains one of these parshas. So Chassidus and Kabbalah explain that these 4 parshas sitting on the head represent 4 aspects of our intellect. Chachma and Bina, and then Da'as is 2, because Da'as feeds our Ava and our Yira, our love of Hashem and our awe of Hashem. So these 4 boxes, the 4 parshas, correspond to 4 aspects of intellect. The one on the most extreme side, which is the first, is Chachma. That is the parsha in Parshas Boy of Kadesh Li Kol B'chor. And there it says, Ula Zikarein Beineinecha, that the Tefillin are Zikarein. So we see Chachma is associated with memory, which is the idea of a Zachar. So that is the father. In Atzilus is the sphere of Chachma. Uba Atzilus, and in the world of Atzilus, Havlad Hoylech Achar HaZachar, the child follows the Zachar. So the Zachar is Chachma, and the child here, as we'll see, is the emotions. Al derech ma shekasuv, as it says in the pasuk, Ma Shemoy u'ma Shem Benoi. The what is his name, and what is the name of his father. Now the word ma, meaning what, in Chassidus represents the idea of bittul, the idea of humility, because ma, what is it? And that is associated with the sphere of Chachma. Ma Shemai, what is his name? Da Abba, what is that referring to? That is referring to Chachma. Chachma is what? Koyach Ma. What is the name of the Abba in the spheres? Chachma. Chachma is made up of Koyach Ma, the power of Ma. Uma Shem Benoi, and what is the name of the Benoi? Za, Zer Anpin, the emotional qualities of the world of Atzilus, Shaboy Hu Shem Ma. Why is that? Because just as Chachma is Shem Ma, so too Za is Shem Ma. And we're not going to go into the calculations of what Shem Ma is now. We'll leave that for another time, because we want to get through these teachings. But I'm Bizarre HaKadosh, Parshas Balak, Daf Kuf Tzadik Aleph, I'm a base, Uva Daf Reish Gimel, I'm a base, Tiyuru V'Diyukna Dabai is Rashim Bei Mamish. The Zohar says that the form, just as a child will look and resemble their parents, so too the form of Chachma, of the father, is imprinted in the offspring, which is the midos, the emotional qualities of Zah. Daha Raza Delay Merosh Tzurim Iu V'Isyachet Bereshet the Giza Ubishvila, that Hamshach of Chachma comes down through the pathway through Bina and ultimately gives rise to the emotional response, which is the child. So let's just go down to where I'm highlighting the words over here. Hare. So what do we see? Shavlad Za, the offspring, which is the emotional qualities, Hoylech Achar HaZachar de Chachma, follows the Zachar, which is the Sphira of Chachma. So that is the world of Atzilus. The world of Atzilus is a world where there is Kiddushin, there is Kodesh, there is the revelation of Chachma. There is no Aveira, because in the world of Atzilus there is only good, there is no evil. And in Atzilus, the Vlad, which is the emotions, follow the father, which is Chachma, i.e. there is a revelation of Chachma in the Midos, and they resemble one another. Okay, so let's jump down now to the second distinction in the Mishnah. Actually, no, sorry. Let's continue on with this one over here. I take that back. Okay, let's go down to. We'll go to. Let's keep going. So he says as follows: Hazachar. The word Hazachar. It says Hazachar has the gematria, has a combined gematria of Ayin base 72 plus Sag 63 plus Mem Hey 45 plus Ban, which is 52. Now, what is that? Shehu Shem Havaya Bedaled Miluach. The Shem Havaya B'Chachma B'Chla. When we take the word Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei, the divine name, if we spell each letter out in full, so Yud is Yud Vav Daled, as we saw in our shir this morning. But the other letters, how do you spell Hey? How do you spell Vav? How do you spell Hey? There are different ways that they could be spelled. So Hey could be spelled Hey Aleph. Hey could be spelled Hey Hey. And Hey could be spelled Hey Yud. Depending how we spell the letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei leads to one of four gematrias, either 72, 63, 45, or 52. The word Zachar, Hazachar, has the combined gematria of all four possible spellings of Shem Havaya. And the Shem Havaya Yud Kei Vav Kei is associated with the spirit of Chachma. The Chen Shem Havaya Hu B'Tiferes Tezah Haben. And similarly, we know that the name, as we saw in our shir this morning, Yud Kei Vav Kei, is also associated with the attribute of Tiferes, which is the primary essential midah of the emotions of Zer Anpin. So the father, Chachma, is Havaya, and Hazachar, the Ben, is Havaya as well. B'ni b'chayri Yisrael, as Hashem says, the Jewish people are my firstborn. Ki avlad haben hoylech achar Hazachar to Chachma, because in the world of Atzilus, like the Mishnah says, the child follows the father. Now, very interesting. These words, Achar Hazachar, which the Mishnah uses, the child goes Achar Hazachar, the child will follow the male, which is the father. Achar Hazachar is Gematria Emes, has the Gematria of Emes, which means truth. Ki Emes hu b'Chachma, we know the truth is in Chachma, as explained in Tanya Perek Lamed Hey, in the Haggah, because Chachma is the primary revelation of the Ein Sof, and therefore Chachma is associated with Emes. V'chein Emes hu b'Tiferes Dezah Haben. And similarly, we know that the midah of Emes is the midah of Yaakov Avinu, which is associated with the sphera of Tiferes. So just as Chachma is Emes, Zah is Emes. Just as Chachma is Havaya, Tiferes or Zah is Havaya. So we see that in Atzilus, the child follows the father. And then if we take the combined gematria, Hoylech Achar Hazachar, that the child in this relationship, Hoylech goes after the male parent, the father, Gematria Top Kuf base. That comes to the Gematria, these three words of 502. Why is that significant? Minyan Shnei Chaye Ha'ovis. that this is the life. If we add up the ages to which each of the Avos, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov lived, it comes to the Gematria 502. Kuf Ayin Hey, 175 years of Avraham Avinu, Kuf Pei, 180 years of Yitzchak Avinu, and Kuf Mem Zayin, 147 years of Yaakov Avinu. Who Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, which are the spheres of Chesed, Gevura, and Tiferes, Shehem Bechinas, Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. The three divisions of the Jewish people parallel the three primary spheres. The Kohen, as we saw this morning, is Chesed, that is Abraham Avinu. The Levi is Gevura, that is Yitzchak. And the Yisraelim is connected to Tiferes, which is Yaakov. So we see Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are the three groupings of the Jewish people. The Chen V'Anukva, and so too on the feminine side, each of the Avos had an Eishes Chayil. Yes, Gimel B'Chinas Elu, we also have the three female counterparts of Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. Ki Gimel Avos Yinichu Roishmam Berechem Hanukva. K'moshe Yisbar Be'etz Chaim Shar HaYareach Perek Gimel Ayin Sham. That through the relations with the Imahos, an imprint of the midah of the Avos was placed within the Imahos. So the Imahos also have these three qualities of Chesed, Gevura, and Tiferes, and from there comes Kohenes, Leviah, the Yisraelis, a female Kohen, Levi, and a Yisrael. And so too, what is the female counterpart? That is what is referred to in Shir Hashirim as the Yefei Banashim, the most beautiful of all women. And these words, Yefei Banashim, also adds up to the same gematria as the age of the three patriarchs, 175 of Avram, 180 of Yitzchak, and 147 of Yaakov. Vezeu kohenes v'leviah v'Yisraelis. Shebechinas nukva shenasu l'kohen levi v'Yisrael. So in the relationship of the Avos, we see the example of a Kohen, Levi Yisrael, marrying a Kohenes Leviah v'Yisrael, which is the case of the Mishnah, which discusses a perfectly valid Kiddushin. Over Derech Klal, Kohen, Levi, Yisrael, who are Gimel Kavin de Atzilus. These are the three lines of Atzilus: Chesed, Gevura, and Tiferes. Ubefrat, Shuhu Ha'av, Hainu Ha'avos, Shukulam Nikroim Av, Bechinis Av, the Chachma, who are Reisha, Gizo, Shvila, Gimel Koitze Ayud. So now we're going to skip a little bit down, and we're going to move on to the next Chalukah of the Mishnah. So we're now on line 7 of this, line 8 of this page. So that's the first distinction. HaChalukah base. Then we come to the second category of the Mishnah. That is as follows. Komakim sheyesh kiddushin veyesh avera. So the second part of the Mishnah, there is valid kiddushin, but it involves an avera, like a kohen marrying a divorcee. Hu bebria, whereas the first part of the Mishnah corresponds to the world of Atzilus, the second part of the Mishnah corresponds to the world of Beria. Sheyesh sham kiddushin. Because in the world of Bria, like in the world of Atzilus, there is also Kiddushin. There is also a revelation of the Kodesh of Chachma. Kibina mekanenes sham, because whereas in the world of Chachma, that is where the spirit of Chachma resides primarily. In the world of Bria, that is where you have Bina. The spirit of Bina resides in the world of Bria. Shegam hi bechinis kedusha. Even the level of Bria is also considered a level of Kedusha as well, and we'll see why. We say in our davening that Hashem is Boirei Kedoshim. He creates the holy ones. And the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah explains that the holy ones refer to the spheres of Chachma and Bina. They are both referred to as Kodesh. Ubedir Amasu Shabbos Shabbosin Shemikdash HaKodesh Kai Al Bina. Gam Chachma Nikra Kodesh Mispashet Bebina. And furthermore, Chachma, which is the essential level of Kodesh of Kiddushin, we know that Chachma comes down into Bina, Ubeza, and it also comes down into the emotions. Ki Yisoid Abba Aruch, it says that Abba Chachma is long, that it extends downwards. Shemispashet Ad Yisoid Zah, that it comes down not only into Bina, but Chachma also, the influence of Chachma also comes down into the emotions of Zer Ampin as well. If so, Imkain Bebina Hamisabeshes Bebria Yesh Kiddushin. And therefore in Bina, because Bina itself and because it receives from Chachma is called Kodesh, Bina resides in the world of Bria. That's why in the second part of our Mishnah, which is about the world of Bria, there is Kiddushin. There's a revelation of Kodesh. Yesham Avera. But whereas in the first part of the Mishnah, there was no Avera, here there is an Avera, Kohen and a divorcee. Because whereas in Atzilus it is Lo Yegurcha Ra, it's a world which is all good, in Bria you have the minority of Ra. Bria is the beginning of Yeshus. It's the beginning of independent creation from Hashem, meaning something that exists outside of godliness. And therefore, whilst it is still a world which is lofty, it's a world which is spiritual, but nonetheless, there's a miut Ra, there's a dimension of Ra over there, and therefore there is an Aveira. And additionally, why is this world, this level of Bria, associated with Ra, and therefore there is Aveira? From the sphere of Bina, the Zohar tells us that is where the dinin, that is where the gevuros, that is where judgments are awakened at the end. That from Bina, Bina is the source of din, of dinim, of gevuros, and therefore it is considered as having an element of Ra. Just as we find the Arizal explains that Tzara'as comes from Bina, that is written in Shah Leah Barachu Perek Zayin of L'Kutei Torah B'Dir Maskel Zois Ties Torah Samatorah Ayin Sham. Zehu Sheyesh Aver Gam Ken B'Kiddushin. And that's why in the world of Bria, like the second part of the Mishnah, on one hand there is Kiddushin, there's the revelation of godliness, of Chachma, but at the same time from Bina there is the level of Miut Ra in Bria, and therefore there is Aveira. V'lachein B'Nesuei Isha Sheyeh Kiddushin V'Ein Aveira Tzarich. Okay, well, let's skip these brackets. Let's move on. V'yesham hey bechinus nukvin. Now, on the feminine side of this relationship that the Mishnah discusses, there are 5 females. There's the almana, the widow who is forbidden to a kohen gadol. There's a gerusha or a chalutza, a divorcee or woman who has had chalitza performed. Mamzeres and a nesina from the givonim. And that is the last part of the Mishnah by mamzer v'nasin lebas Yisrael. Why is that? We know that the name, as we mentioned, Yud K Vav K, parallels the spheres, whereas the Yud is Chachma, Bina is associated with the Hey of Hashem's name, and that is what resides in the world of Bria. And therefore, in the second part of our Mishnah, which corresponds to the world of Bria, there are 5 women which are listed, 5 categories, corresponding to Bina, which is the letter Hey of Hashem's name. And the law is Havlad Hoylach Achar HaPogum. The child that is born to this relationship takes on the blemish or the deficiency of whichever party has this deficiency. Shebishnehem. Pagam Nimshach Mibina. And as we mentioned, the idea of blemish comes from the sphere of Bina. Shemina Dinim Misarin V'Stoifa, like Tzaras. The Bina is the source of Gevuros. Uchmai Nega Gematria Pagam. The word Nega, Tzaras, Nega meaning a blemish, and we saw that comes from the sphere of Bina, has the same gematria as Pagam. Nimshach Bibina, it comes from Bina. So that is the second grouping in the Mishnah, where there is Kiddushin, but there is an Aveira. That is the world of Bria. Now we come to the third distinction in the Mishnah. HaChaluka HaGimel. Kol mi she'ein la alav aval yesh la alacherim Kiddushin havlad mamzer. So this is talking about one of the incestual relationships, a brother and a sister. So she has Kiddushin for others, but no Kiddushin to the one she had a child with. And the law is the child is a mamzer. And this third category in the Mishnah corresponds to the world of Yetzirah. Why is that? The world of Atzilus is all good. The world of Bria is majority good, but has elements of Yeshus, elements of negativity. The world of Yetzirah is a world of equilibrium, where there is equal between good and bad. Zehu she'ein la alav kiddushin mitzad ha'mechza ra, ve'yesh la alachein kiddushin mitzad ha'mechza tov. And therefore, our Mishnah splits the kiddushin into 2. That with the man she had the child with, like a brother and a sister, there is no kiddushin. But were she to marry someone else, another Jew, there would be kiddushin. So in the world of Yetzirah, you've got half good, half bad. From the element which is bad, that is where there is no Kiddushin, there is no revelation of kodesh, of kedusha, but from the side in Yetzirah where there is mechta toif, half good, on that side you have the revelation of kiddushin. The yesh b'Yetzirah gamken kiddushin. In the world of Yetzirah there is also kiddushin. Ki b'Yetzirah mislabesh za shisoid abba. In the world of Atzilus is the spirit of Chachma. In the world of Bria is the spirit of Bina. And the 6 emotional traits reside in the world of Yetzirah. Now, even in the 6 emotional traits, as we've discussed before, that there is a Hamshacha revelation of the spirit of Chachma, which is the level of Kodesh. And therefore, the world of Yetzirah is also a world of Kodesh, a world where there is Shayich Kiddushin, because there is also revelation of Kodesh. Nispashet by Gamken, Zel Sheyesh Metzius Kiddushin, and that's why in our Mishnah, in the 3rd section, there is a concept of Kiddushin, were she to marry somebody else. Ba'ayin b'Zohar HaKadosh, Parsha Shlach Tav Kuf Nutes, Amud Aleph, Ba'atlas Almin, concerning the 3 worlds of Atzilus, Bria, and Yetzirah, V'makam Sham, Shem L'neged Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah. And then we come to the 4th world, which is Olam Asiya. Olam Asiya, which is the lowest of the 4 worlds, Hu Nikra Hevel V'Rik U'Klippa. The world that we live in, as the Alter Rebbe describes in Tanya, is a world which is permeated with Ra. It's primarily evil. Or Rashayim Goydrim Boy, we see that the evil people are successful and dominant in this world. It is a world of Klippa which conceals godliness. It's a world which is empty and devoid of godliness. Neged Atzilus Bri Yetzirah, in comparison to the worlds of Atzilus Bri and Yetzirah, Shehem Toiv, which are good. And that is why in the first 3 distinctions of the Mishnah, which correspond to Atzilus, Bria, and Yetzirah, in all of those cases, Yesh Kiddushin, there is some aspect or level of Kiddushin, Shutoiv, which is good. It's a valid Kiddushin. But when we come to the 4th category, which is the case of a non-Jew marrying a Jew, in that case, there is no Kiddushin at all, not with him and not with any man. Ein sham metzius Kiddushin klal. You have over Rik, because like the world of Asiya, it is a world where there is not a revelation of Kodesh, of the Kiddushin of Chachma. Hachaluka adalat she'ein la loy ala v'loy alachem Kiddushin hu ba'Asiya shu have over Rik mokem haklippus, the place of the klippus. Okay, let's skip the brackets again and we'll jump down. What is the law in such a case? If there is no valid Kiddushin at all with him or with any other man, a non-Jewish woman marries a Jewish man and has a child, Havlad Kamoisa, the child follows the mother. The Hanakeva, which is the female. Why is that? So in the world of Atzilus, again, we have the revelation of Chachma. In the world of Bria, we have the primary revelation of Bina. In the world of Yetzirah is the primary revelation of the emotions of Zer and Bin. And in the world of Asiya, the primary revelation, or it's a revelation of Malchus. And Malchus, of course, Bechinis Nukva Bilvad, is the feminine sphera, and therefore the female is dominant, and therefore in this case, the child will follow the status of the mother. So that's the explanation of the 4 levels within the Mishnah. Again, just to summarize before we read the concluding section, we have, let's go back to our Mishnah. So you can follow along in the screen. So we have in the just give me a moment while we bring it up. So back to our Mishnah. The first case of the Mishnah is where there is Kiddushin and no Aveir, that's Atzilus, where there is the revelation of Kodesh, of Chachma, but there is no Aveir because it's all good, that world. The child follows the Zachar because in the world of Atzilus, the father, which is Chachma, and Zah, which is the child, resemble one another. And that is Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Kohen, Levi, Yisrael, and Kohenes, Levi of Yisrael is the female counterpart. Then we come to the second group of the Mishnah, where there is Kiddushin. This is the world of Bria, where there is a revelation of the Kedusha of Bina and Chachma. But there is Aveira, because now we have the beginnings of Ra, of negativity, and from Bina comes Gevuros. There the child takes on the blemish which comes from the Gevuros of Bina. There are 5 women listed because Bina is associated with the Hey of Hashem's name. The third category of the Mishnah, there is Kiddushin, but not for him, only for another man. If she married someone else, it would be Kiddushin, but to this man not, and the child is a mamzer. This refers to the world of Yetzirah, where there is half good, half bad, and mitzad, the half good, there is Kiddushin, the half bad, there is no Kiddushin, but still there is a concept of Kiddushin. And then we come to the fourth world, which is the world of Asiya, the world which is majority evil. And in that world, there is only the revelation of, not of Kedusha, not of Chachma, but only of Malchus. And therefore, there is no Kiddushin at all. And the child follows the mother because Malchus is the feminine Sphira. So now let's go back into the writings of Rebbe Levi. You should see that coming up on the screen now. And we're going to now move on to the next part, and that is as follows. Okay. V'yesh Maila, 6 lines up from the bottom. V'yesh Maila b'chaluka adalet. As we mentioned at the beginning, even though the fourth category, which is the world of Asiya, is the lowest of all, there is a redemptive quality, and it has a quality which in a way is greater than some of the other worlds as well. Sheyachol lispara or listaken. So the world of Atzilus, any child born there, so to speak, it's all good. The world of Bria, you can have a blemish, that the child would be a chalal, or the child would be a mamzer, etc. The world of Yetzirah, there is certainly a blemish that the child is an absolute mamzer. And in those two worlds of Bria and Yetzirah, there is no way for that child to be rectified themselves. But in the fourth world, where a non-Jewish woman marries a Jewish man, that child can convert and become fully Jewish. So the world of Asiya, which is the fourth category, has this redemptive quality that can become refined and elevated. Unlike the second and third categories, the world of Bria and Yetzirah. Asiya, why is that possible? Because concerning Asiya, it says Af Asisim. So it says, we say this in a pasuk quoting in Pirkei Avos. The pasuk says that whatever Hashem created, He created for His honor. Shenemar Kol hakoyre b'shmi b'lichvoidi b'rasiv yetzartiv Af Asisim. B'rasiv is the world of Bria. Yetzartiv, I have formed it, is the world of Yetzirah. Af Asisim is the world of Asiya, of action, of our world. Now, what is this word af here? What is this word af doing here? Af hifsik. The word af creates a separation. So you have lichvoidi, which is the world of Atzilus, Hashem's kavod, Barasiv, the world of Bria, and the world of Yetzirah. They are all worlds, like we explained, where there is the revelation of Kedusha. There is Kiddushin. The last world, Asisiv, is separate. There is no Kiddushin. And that's why we have the word af. It separates between the world of Asiya and the upper three worlds. It separates Musad Ma'abgimel Bechinas HaKoidmin Atzilus Bri Yetzirah, Shem Bechinas Kol HaNikra B'Shmi Atzilus Barasiv Yetzartiv. Shmi, which is the world of Atzilus, or Kvoidi, Barasi, and which is Bria, and Yetzartiv, the world of Yetzirah. And so too in our Mishnah. In the first 3 sections of the Mishnah, Atzilus Bria Yetzirah, which parallel Atzilus Bria and Yetzirah, Yesh Metzius Kiddushin, there is Kiddushin, Masha Ein Kein B'Chaluka Dalad, whereas in the fourth category, Ein Metzius Kiddushin, the world of Asiya, there is no Kiddushin. Hukumai Af Asisiv, Af Hifsik, it's the same as in this pasuk, that the word Af separates Asiya from the other 3 worlds. That's one explanation of the word Af. Af, Pirush Af Asisiv, Hu Gamkein Af Marbe. But the word af is not only, or cannot only be interpreted as being separating from the other 3 categories, but the word af means even, that it's adding something. And what is that? There's a uniqueness of our world that despite being the lowest of worlds, and therefore despite being the least godly of all the worlds, but when we refine this world, al yedei tshuva, then we're able to elevate this world of Asiya all the way up to the level of Atzilus. That through being mevara this world of Asiya, through tshuva, we add a new dimension, and that is we elevate this world to the level of Atzilus, where there is no blemish whatsoever as well. And that's why in the world of Asiya, the Kiddushin there, such lack of Kiddushin, a non-Jewish woman and a Jewish man, the child can convert, which represents the idea of tshuva, the idea of birur, of refining, and then becomes a fully fledged Jew without any blemish whatsoever, can marry a Kohenes, can marry a Leviah, can marry Israelis, no qualms whatsoever. Okay, now just interesting parallel that's Pesach related. V'chein ba'dalet banim. These four worlds, Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, and Asiya, also correspond to the four sons at the Seder Shabbat Pesach, Shehem Batzilus, Bri, Yitzir, and Asiya. So of course we have the world of, now there's different ways according to Kabbalah of calculating which son corresponds to which world, but certainly the world of Atzilus is the Ben Chacham, the wise son. The world of Bria is considered the Tam, the simple son. The world, the level of Yetzirah, the world of Yetzirah corresponds to the She'eni Yedei Lishol, the child which cannot ask. And finally, the lowest of the worlds, the least godly, the world of Asiya, corresponds to the Ben Rasha, the wicked son. And therefore, this idea that the world of Asiya can be elevated to the level of Atzilus, that is why Samchu Ben Rasha Shabasiya Le Ben Chacham Shabatzilus. That's why the sons are written out of order. And the Ben Rasha, even though he parallels the world of Asiya, is placed after the Ben Chacham, which is the world of Atzilus. Because through refining the Rasha, through refining the world of Asiya, you can elevate it to the level of Atzilus, to the level of the Ben Chacham. References in the writings of the Arizal. Ben Rasha, furthermore, Ben Rasha who bekois sheni. Each of the four cups of wine correspond to the four sons as well. So the first cup of wine is Chachma, that is Atzilus, that's Kiddush, Kodesh, that's the Ben Chacham. The second cup is the cup on which we say the entire Haggadah. The Haggadah is said over the second cup, which corresponds to the Ben Rasha, which is the world of Asiya. And we say over this cup, Avadim Hayinu, we were slaves, but Hashem took us out. He took us out of slavery to freedom, from servitude to redemption, which the idea of transformation of Asiya, of the Ben Rasha, through Teshuvah, to become elevated to the level of Atzilus, to the Ben Chacham. Now, why do we say two things? We say Ma'alkus L'Cherus, Umishibud L'Geula. These two ideas of going from being slaves to being free, that is like if you have a Jewish man has a child with a female slave. The child is a slave themselves, but that child can become emancipated and become free. So too the Ben Rasha, which is the world of Asiya, the lowest of the worlds, can become transformed and redeemed and elevated to the level of Atzilus. And similarly, we say in the Haggadah, our ancestors were idolaters, and now Hashem brought us close to His service. That is also like the case in the fourth division of the Mishnah, of a Jewish man marries a non-Jewish woman. The child is not Jewish, but the child can convert. So it's going from being initially it was an Oived Avodah Zarah, not Jewish, and then now